The bulldozer's blade tore into the mound with a grinding screech. Sandra Whitfield stood nearby, shielding her eyes from the sunlight, a thin smile on her lips. The operator shoved earth aside in wet, dark ribbons. Sandra watched with the satisfaction of a woman who always got what she wanted. Then a crack that wasn't metal. A hollow, brittle shatter. The blade caught something solid and flung pale fragments into the air. A worker near the cut lurched forward, squinting at the dirt. His mouth opened, but no sound came. He pointed a trembling finger. A human femur jutted from the soil, ancient and bleached. Beside it lay shards of a painted ceramic vessel, its geometric patterns unchanged for centuries.
What in thee? Is that some kind of animal bone?
The worker just backed away, shaking his head, one hand clamped over his mouth as if to hold in a scream. Sandra's smile dissolved completely. She took a halting step forward, then froze as she recognized the unmistakable curve of a human jawbone. A pickup truck tore up the gravel access road and skidded to a halt. Christopher Reeves stepped out, his gaze sweeping the chaos.
They knew. They knew what this was, and they did it anyway.
3 months earlier, the mound was whole. Christopher walked its slope with Elder Thomas, whose silver braids caught the morning light.
This ground holds the bones of our ancestors for 800 years. It is our sacred trust.
My family has stewarded this land for generations. I'm dedicated to protecting it.
At the next HOA meeting, Sandra Whitfield rose with a tight, practiced smile.
There's an eyesore on the Reeves property I'd like addressed. A worthless lump of dirt blocking the mountain view.
Christopher didn't raise his voice. He simply said,
That mound is a protected archaeological site under federal law. It will not be touched.
Sandra's smile tightened. She sat down, whispering to the board member beside her. She dismissed the agreement as bureaucratic nonsense. To her, the mound was nothing but dirt. At home, Christopher placed the NAGPRA agreement in a fireproof safe. He had a feeling he'd need it. The emails started arriving within a week. Sandra Whitfield, polite at first, would not let the matter go. Dear Mr. Reeves, as a fellow homeowner, I'm sure we can find a compromise regarding that hill on your property. It's simply a matter of aesthetics. Christopher read the message on his tablet, his expression unmoved. He'd expected this. The next email came with more edge. Sandra had been talking to neighbors. I've consulted with several neighbors, and we agree that the mound detracts from our views and lowers property values. Surely you can see reason. At the local coffee shop, a fellow HOA member gave Christopher a cold look. Sandra's gossip had spread. He replied each time with the same measured refusal, attaching the tribal preservation agreement. Then came the email that crossed the line. I don't know what kind of people you think would want that heap, but around here we value clean lines and civilization.
That's not about the view. She's showing her true colors.
Sandra didn't wait for permission. She called the Architectural Review Committee into session, a folder thick with evidence under her arm.
That hill on Reeves property is obstructing views and dragging down our community aesthetic. I'm proposing a sightline improvement project. I've had a land use consultant review the site. The report concludes it's entirely non-historic, just ordinary fill dirt from an old farming operation.
The committee, half of them her friends, nodded along. The vote passed without a single objection. 2 days later, Sandra stood in the gravel yard of a local excavation company, shaking hands with a foreman who didn't ask many questions.
It's a simple grading job. Flatten that mound behind the tree line. I can pay cash today. No need to pull permits for a little landscaping.
That same afternoon, Christopher walked the long meadow at the base of the mound, the grass high and untouched.
At least she's gone quiet. Maybe she finally understood the agreement.
Back at her home office, Sandra spread a site blueprint across her desk, circling the mound with a red marker. She had no idea what lay beneath that circle, and no idea that her every move was about to awaken a sleeping giant. The morning of the bulldozing arrived, crisp and clear. Sandra Whitfield's Range Rover rolled up the access road, dust billowing behind.
Right there, that's the spot. Start from the top and work down.
The bulldozer engine roared to life, tracks chewing the gravel as it rumbled toward the mound. 20 miles away, Christopher's phone buzzed in the middle of a county land use meeting.
Christopher, there's heavy equipment on the mound right now. They're not wasting time.
I'm on my way. Don't let them take another scoop.
He didn't wait for the meeting to end. He was out the door and in his truck, accelerator flat to the floor. Sandra watched the first blade of soil curl back, dark and rich. She nodded, satisfied. The operator pushed forward again, the edge biting deeper this time, scraping the topsoil away. The blade caught on something solid, and the operator paused, frowning. Sandra stepped closer, impatient. The operator reversed the blade, revealing a tangle of white shapes. The ground seemed to bleed history into the sunlight. A worker shouted, a raw, primal sound. Everyone froze. Sandra's hand went to her throat. Christopher's truck slammed to a stop at the tree line. He was out before the dust settled, already dialing.
Elder, they've broken through. Bones are visible. I need you here. And I'm calling NAGPRA now.
Keep working. It's probably just old farm animal remains. Move that dirt.
The operator climbed down, shaking his head. The other workers stepped back, forming a loose, horrified semicircle. Christopher shrugged off his brown jacket and laid it gently over the exposed bones, his hands steady.
NAGPRA hotline? This is Christopher Reeves. I'm reporting a violation of a protected burial site. Immediate response needed.
This is a misunderstanding. I had no idea this can be handled quietly.
No one answered her. The mound lay open, the silence now heavier than any machine. Within the hour, a black SUV with government plates pulled onto the grass. Agent Davis stepped out, badge already clipped to his belt.
I'm Agent Davis, NAGPRA Enforcement. This is a federal crime scene as of this moment. Nobody leaves.
Agent, this has been blown out of proportion. I'm the HOA chair. There was no malicious intent, just a landscaping error.
Davis didn't reply. He knelt by the trench, photographing every bone, every shard, the jacket still draped across the remains. Elder Thomas arrived moments later, his silver braids swaying as he walked straight to the mound. He did not look at Sandra. He lit a bundle of sage and moved it in slow circles over the disturbed earth, a low chant filling the heavy air. Then a news van ground to a halt at the cordon, and Patricia Jenkins stepped out, microphone already in hand.
Mrs. Whitfield, did you knowingly destroy a Native American burial site? What do you have to say to the tribe? No comment. This is private property. Stop filming.
Sandra scrambled into her Range Rover and sped away. Through the back window, her white-knuckled grip on the wheel was unmistakable. By late afternoon, FBI agent Torres arrived on scene, her navy blazer crisp. She conferred briefly with Agent Davis, then took over the investigation.
Mr. Reeves, we need every document you have on the site's status, agreements, correspondence, anything that establishes the sanctity of this mound.
Right here. NAGPRA cooperative agreement, tribal stewardship records, and every email from Sandra Whitfield.
Torres read through the emails, her jaw tightening. When she reached the line about what kind of people, she set the page down slowly.
This isn't a landscaping dispute. This is evidence of targeted animus. The hate crime unit will be taking a very close look.
Meanwhile, Sandra sat at her kitchen island, her husband's voice rising from the other room. You need a criminal defense lawyer, Sandra, now.
It was just a hill. Everyone's acting like I dug up a graveyard on purpose.
That evening, local news aired the story with a keyron that made Sandra's blood run cold. Potential hate crime at Indian burial mound.
Federal sources confirmed they are investigating whether this was a deliberate act of desecration, and if racial bias played a role.
As the broadcast ended, Christopher sat alone at his table, the tribal agreement before him. The federal machinery was now in motion. The next morning, Elder Thomas stood before a cluster of microphones, tribal police flanking him.
The tribal nation will prosecute Sandra Whitfield to the fullest extent of our laws. Sovereign jurisdiction is not a technicality. It is our right.
Tribal police served the notice that afternoon, a separate criminal complaint that ran parallel to the federal case. That evening, the HOA board gathered in an emergency session. The room was charged with fear and blame. One member slammed a newspaper on the table. The headline screamed, "HOA chair bulldozes sacred site."
Resign. I did nothing wrong. That hill wasn't marked. I had no idea.
Her protests fell on stony faces. Even her allies averted their eyes.
Fine. You want a scapegoat? I'll fight this myself. You'll see, it's all a misunderstanding.
Outside, Christopher watched the meeting adjourn from across the street, the unserved federal indictment heavy in his thoughts.
She still doesn't understand. This isn't about paperwork. It's about the ancestors.
The tribal courtroom was small but heavy with authority. Sandra Whitfield sat rigid beside her attorney, who rose to speak. "Your Honor, this case has no standing. My client couldn't have known the site was sacred, and the alleged victim is not a tribal member." The prosecutor called Christopher Reeves to the stand. He walked forward calmly, his eyes never leaving Sandra. "Mr. Reeves, are you a citizen of this tribal nation?" The question hung in the air. Christopher reached into his jacket.
I am an enrolled member. My great-grandmother was Wiaka Waste Win of this nation, and her blood runs through me.
He placed a faded photograph on the rail, an elderly native woman with sharp eyes and a familiar jawline. Sandra's mouth fell open. Her lawyer's pen clattered to the floor. The courtroom erupted in gasps and whispers. Sandra's face went ashen, her knuckles white on the table. The man she'd targeted with racial slurs was a citizen of the tribe. Elder Thomas, seated in the gallery, nodded once, slowly. The truth had finally surfaced. The judge called for order, but the case had just transformed. Christopher's quiet legacy had become the bedrock of the prosecution. 2 days after the hearing, Sandra's phone buzzed nonstop. Voicemails full of venom. Grave robber, racist witch. She unplugged the landline.
The hate crime enhancement has been formally approved. This case is now a top-tier federal priority.
Patricia Jenkins obtained the full email chain and published it. The line, "What kind of people?" trended nationally. Protesters gathered outside the HOA office holding signs, "Justice for the ancestors." Sandra watched from behind closed blinds. By nightfall, she packed a single suitcase and fled to a motel under a false name. Her world had shrunk to a single room.
The nation sees you as a defender, but the decision is yours. The council will support whatever path you choose.
The next morning, a courier delivered a thick envelope from Sandra's insurance company. In exchange for dropping all tribal claims, Mrs. Whitfield's insurer will pay $3 million.
$3 million could restore the land. But can money erase what she took from my ancestors?
Christopher, the council is waiting. What will you do?
Christopher didn't answer. He stared at the image of Wiaka Waste Win, the weight of 2 paths crushing him from both sides. Christopher folded the photograph of his great-grandmother and slipped it into his chest pocket. He stepped out of the truck, his decision made.
Then walk with me. The nation has been waiting for this.
An hour later, Christopher stood before a bank of microphones, the tribal flag draped over his arm. Elder Thomas at his side.
No amount of money will buy back the dignity of my ancestors. The tribal nation will not be silenced. We will see this through.
In a sterile law office across town, Sandra's attorney crumpled the settlement offer and hurled it into the trash. The phone rang. The tribal court announced a trial date for 2 weeks later. Federal prosecutors unsealed the indictment, listing hate crime enhancements. The OA board met in emergency session. A motion to dissolve the association passed with a show of trembling hands. At the dingy motel, Sandra answered the door to a process server. Divorce papers, signed by her husband, were thrust into her hands.
No, he can't. This is all a misunderstanding.
Back at the tribal offices, Christopher placed the flag gently on a shelf next to his grandfather's photo and a bundle of sage. The die was cast. The tribal courtroom filled with the scent of sage and old wood. 6 elders sat in a row, their faces carved from stone. The first witness, the excavation foreman, adjusted his collar. He refused to look at Sandra. She told us it was a simple grading job, paid cash. When we saw the bones, she ordered us to keep going. The foreman pointed at Sandra. A forensic anthropologist from Nagpra testified next. She held up a labeled bag containing a painted shard. These remains date between 1100 and 1300 AD. The grave goods match Mississippian traditions. This was a known, documented sacred site. Then the prosecutor projected Sandra's email onto a screen. The words, "What kind of people," filled the wall. The jury of elders leaned forward. One woman with silver braids closed her eyes as if in pain. The prosecutor walked toward the jury, her voice low. This was not ignorance. This was contempt. Sandra's lawyer stood, but his objections were weak. Even he seemed to realize the case was lost. The judge called a recess. The elders filed out in silence. Outside the window, a raven perched on the sill, watching. After 2 hours, the elders returned, their footfalls silent on the cedar floor. The foreman rose, holding a single sheet of paper. "We find the defendant guilty on all counts: desecration of a burial site, violation of cultural heritage, and malicious intent as a hate crime." Sandra's knees buckled. Her lawyer caught her elbow as a guttural sob escaped the woman who once commanded HOA meetings with iron certainty. The federal trial, a mirror of the tribal proceeding, moved swiftly. The emails appeared again. The foreman repeated his testimony, and the jury returned in 3 hours. The federal judge pronounced the sentence without emotion. For violating Nagpra and committing a hate crime, 12 years in federal prison. The shackles clicked around Sandra's wrists, the sound sharp and final. She did not look back as 2 marshals guided her through the side door. Christopher watched from the front row, one hand pressed to his chest. He did not smile, but his breathing slowed.
Great-grandmother, they heard us. The ancestors can rest now.
The ancestors are restless no longer. You honored your blood.
Outside the federal courthouse, the raven launched from a ledge, wings cutting through the late afternoon light toward the foothills. 3 days after the federal verdict, the tribal council convened. Their attorney filed a civil claim against the dissolved HOA for $40 million.
The corporation that sanctioned the desecration must answer. We will reclaim what was taken, not for vengeance, but for the ancestors.
The HOA's insurance carrier scanned the policy and found the exclusion: no coverage for intentional acts. The denial letter arrived by courier. Without insurance, the former board faced personal liability. They turned on one another in a frantic series of depositions. One board member broke. "We knew Sandra was going to bulldoze it. We all thought the mound was just dirt." His confession sealed the HOA's fate. The civil court finalized the dissolution and ordered the remaining assets liquidated. The carved stone sign at the entrance was removed within hours. Christopher watched from his truck as the lettering was chiseled away. Beside him, Elder Thomas rolled down the window, letting the breeze in.
The air already smells cleaner. The earth will breathe again.
By week's end, a tow truck hauled Sandra's white Range Rover from her former driveway. It joined her seized assets, the last tangible symbol of her rule.
One more piece of her empire gone. Now the land can truly heal.
A week after the verdict, Patricia Jenkins's investigative documentary aired nationwide. The opening shot was the mound, fenced and quiet, sage smoke rising.
This is the story of a man who carried his ancestors in his blood, and the woman who thought she could bulldoze history.
The segment cut to Christopher, sitting on his porch. The breeze ruffled a bundle of sage beside him. He spoke without anger.
This wasn't about me. It was about ensuring our laws protect what cannot be replaced.
Footage of Elder Thomas leading a prayer at the site filled the screen. Then social media tributes exploded. The hashtag #TheLandRemembers trended for 3 days. A rally at the state capitol drew thousands holding signs of support. Bipartisan lawmakers announced a bill strengthening Nagpra, naming it the Wiaka Waste Wind Protection Act.
My great-grandmother would want this to be a shield for all sacred sites, not just ours.
Patricia Jenkins won a National Journalism Award for the documentary, but at the ceremony she dedicated it to the tribe. Christopher returned to his land, walking the perimeter where the HOA sign once stood. The only sound was the wind through tall grass. On the first anniversary of the verdict, the tribe held the reburial ceremony. Elder Thomas led the procession, a bundle of sage in his hand. His voice rose in an ancient chant, the words carried by the wind across the meadow. Christopher, dressed in a simple white shirt, walked in the line of tribal members, his head bowed. At the end of the ceremony, a new plaque was set into the earth. He read the engraved words. The plaque read, "This ground, once violated, now stands as a testament to sovereign justice." Christopher knelt and pressed his palm against the cool metal, his eyes closing. 200 miles away, Sandra sat on her bunk, staring at a blank wall. The silence was absolute. She clutched a faded photograph of her former life. It felt like a relic from a stranger's memory.
The ancestors are at peace now. That's all that matters.
The mound stood restored, the prairie grass swaying, a raven perched on the new plaque, watching the sunset. After the ceremony, Christopher lingered alone. He climbed the mound, the sun setting beyond the mountains. The wind rippled through the prairie grass, carrying the faint scent of sage from the bundle at his feet. His mind turned to his great-grandmother, her photograph, her unwavering gaze that had guided him.
Your land is safe now. The ancestors can rest at last.
A deep breath released a weight he'd carried for years. His shoulders relaxed, his jaw unclenched. For the first time in memory, a genuine smile touched his lips, not triumphant, but at peace. Below him, the restored mound blended into the meadow, the scar of the bulldozer now healed. The camera pulled back, revealing the full 60 acres, the distant mountain range, and a solitary figure on the hilltop. The raven launched from the plaque and soared, a black silhouette against the orange sky. The land was whole again, and the ancestors at last were silent. Sandra Whitfield's conviction was upheld on appeal. She remains in federal prison, serving her 12-year sentence. The HOA was officially dissolved, its assets liquidated to fund the tribe's new cultural heritage center. The tribe used the settlement to build a museum and preservation office, ensuring sacred sites are never violated again. Christopher Reeves continues to steward the 60-acre property, now with permanent federal protection. The Wiyaka Waste Wind Protection Act passed into law, strengthening NAGPRA protections across the country. Elder Thomas passed the following spring, but his wisdom remains a guiding force for the tribe. The raven returns each year to the mound, a ceremony of its own, watching over the ancestors. On the mound, the plaque remains, its words weathered but unwavering. This ground, once violated, now stands as a testament to sovereign justice. The land remembers. And sometimes, that is enough, and the ancestors rest, finally, in peace. Years later, Christopher Reeves, gray-streaked but standing tall, led a school group up the mound's gentle slope.
Long ago, my great-grandmother's people honored their dead in mounds just like this. This ground is a time capsule of their love. A woman once tried to bulldoze it, thinking it was worthless. She learned that tribal sovereignty is not a loophole. It is the law.
A young girl raised her hand, her voice small but curious. What happened to her?
She faced justice. Not revenge justice. The tribe and the federal government both held her accountable.
The children listened with wide eyes, the breeze carrying the scent of sage from the memorial garden below. High above, a raven cawed, circling the mound. Christopher looked up, a quiet smile settling on his face.
That raven has been here since the first trial. Some say it's an ancestor watching over us.
The bell rang for lunch, but the children lingered, still staring at the mound with new understanding. The story lived on, not in courts or headlines, but in the questions of children and the silence of a protected hill. It started with a blade biting into sacred ground, and a woman who thought a burial mound was just a hill. Human bones emerged, ancient and unforgotten, stopping the machine and shaking the conscience of everyone who saw. In a tribal courtroom, a quiet man unfolded his heritage like a sacred map, revealing he was a son of this nation. 2 courts, one federal and one sovereign, delivered verdicts that echoed across the nation. The HOA that had enabled the desecration dissolved, its sign chiseled away and its assets turned to reparations. The tribe held a reburial ceremony, sage smoke rising as the ancestors were finally laid back into the earth with honor. A plaque was set into the ground, engraved with words that would not fade. This ground, once violated, now stands as a testament to sovereign justice. In 2023, tribal sovereignty protected what was sacred. Christopher Reeves honored his ancestors, and the land remembers. The raven soared into the sunset, and the mound fell silent, holding its secrets in peace forever. Tribal sovereignty is not a loophole. It is the law. If this story moved you, hit subscribe and join a community that believes in real justice. And remember the face that started it all. Wiaka Waste Win. Her name means woman of good words. She spoke through her descendants, and they listened. Because of her, a sacred mound was defended. A law was strengthened, and a bully learned that sovereign justice is real. Thank you for watching. Never forget, the land remembers. See you in the next story. The photograph rested on the witness stand, its edges curled by time, but its message eternal. A raven feather lay beside it, placed there by Christopher after the verdict. The screen goes black. The story is over, but the law endures.